Well, hello there, and welcome to this recap of the first day of the final of the Opera Euro Rabbit. I'm your resident FIDE master, Ingvar Jóhannesson from Iceland, and well, we are basically going to look at all the games of day one. So as always, we have 2 mini matches. So day one is 4 games, day 2 is 4 games. At the end of it, if we have a winner, we have a winner. If they're tied, we have a tiebreak. But this is day one, and Magnus started with the white pieces. We're going to dive right into it. And we had the so-called Nimzo Indian defense, where black plays bishop b4, pins the knight, fights for the e4 square with his pieces. White plays knight f3, castles, queen b3 to hit the bishop. The stock way to play here is to protect the bishop with c5, and after d takes e5, play knight a6. Magnus played bishop d2. The bishop went back to c5, took the pawn. Magnus now pinned the knight, and Wesley went for a fianchetto, queenside fianchetto of the bishop. e3, we have to get these pieces out and castle. That's the plan. Bishop e7, bishop e2. And now Wesley went back to b4. And here, well, it has to be said, Magnus doesn't seem to be in his best form. And here he blunders, he plays a3. And falls for quite a common motif in the Nimzo Indian. But shockingly, Wesley So didn't see it. He took on c3, bishop takes c3. But he had a very strong move, knight into c5, hitting the queen. And if you take the bishop, I will play pawn to a5, hit the queen. And note that the knight is covering all these squares. You only have this square. You can maybe flick in taking, but I take with the pawn to keep the shelter of this pawn with my queen. Now you have to move the queen, I attack it, and it drops off the board. So therefore you can't take the bishop. You have to play queen c2 or queen d1. And if you play queen c2, I will drive your queen to d1, because if you go to c1, I will hit you with a knight fork right here. So when you go to d1, I take on c3, and you have horribly crippled pawns. And black should be able to win one of these pawns. So great mistake, but Wesley did not take advantage of it, and this allows Magnus to take on c3 with the queen. Now his position is fine. Black can play another motif here and go for the ending. Knight e4 hits the queen, hits the bishop. Of course we can take the black queen, which Magnus did, but Wesley So counters by taking on c3. Sorry about that. We can't have our phone peeping here. Bishop e7, rook e8, bishop d6, and now we have the trade on e2. So it looks relatively equal-ish. Black is absolutely fine, rook a to c8, hitting the pawn. Magnus defended, the knight came in. And actually, not all that much happened in this game. Magnus tried to get a pleasant endgame, but Wesley was up to the task. He's putting a lot of pawns on dark squares, the Capablanca rule, same for Magnus. His pawns are on light squares, and he has a dark squared bishop, opposite to what Wesley is doing. So we have a trade, and now Magnus has to weaken his pawns. B takes c4, knight is b5. And an endgame, Wesley brings the king, and he has absolutely no problems whatsoever here. Here he kind of, completes the Capablanca rule. He has almost all his pawns on dark squares. That goes well with the light squared bishop. And, well, Magnus is playing more or less to restrict the bishop, but also trying to make some things happen on the king side, but there's nothing to be had there. And in fact, after h5, black is even slightly better, trying to take this pawn. Magnus plays f4, trying to simplify. King comes back. Now we can take the pawn, because I'm going to hit you back right here. But still, that's what Wesley did, and now we have some simplifications. Rook c1, rook d3, and bishop d3, trying to get the e4 pawn. We get it. Knight comes back, we get the h pawn, but the a pawn drops, and yeah. Some mass trades here. I mean, black is up a pawn, but they just went for the trades, and eventually all the pieces off the board. Bishop takes f3, and the game is drawn immediately. Note that, according to the rules of chess, you can't take the bishop because the game is over. Black can't win by a series of legal moves, so the game is over. The game is not over here, because you can win with a series of legal moves for white. But bishop takes f3, the game is over. So that's why king takes f3 is not played, because it's simply not a legal move according to the rules of chess. Okay, on to game number 2. And here is where things heat up. Wesley So with the white pieces, and he opens up with pawn to e4. Now, for those of you that have been paying attention, Wesley So has been releasing a massive course on 1e4 for white. And in this game, well, I haven't bought the course, so I've only seen the where he lists which lines he's going for. And well, in this game we get to see one of those lines. After knight f3, knight c6, he goes for the Italian, which he has been playing a lot. And after knight f6, knight g5. And are we getting the fried liver? E takes d5? Knight takes d5? No, not at this level. Of course, the fried liver is here, and then now if we take on f7, king takes, and queen f3, etc. A well-known line, considered good for white, but some grandmasters have, well, not some, very few have tried to defend it with black seriously, but that's really difficult. So knight a5 is the main move here. Bishop b5 check, c6 takes, this is all well known. And now bishop d3 by Wesley, and this is what he does recommend in his course. Bishop e2 is what they used to play. Well, it's the main move, the most common move. Then we have something like this, and black has compensation for the sacrificed pawn. But bishop d3 aims to, at least control the e4 square in some lines. So okay, the game continues, knight d5, hitting the knight on g5. The knight moves back. Bishop d6, castles, rook e1 hitting the pawn, and Magnus ignores it and plays f5. Wesley takes, queen f6, the knight comes back, and now g5. Very aggressive, but probably Wesley was well prepared here, because he played c4, hitting the knight, now bishop f1, fortifying the king side, and after g4, he played d4, sacrificing a piece. And well, this has been played before. After these moves, knight e6, Wesley played queen to c3, which is a novelty. And he seems to get a good position. He's hitting the knight, so Magnus retreated the knight. We now have c5 hitting the bishop, b4, fortifying the pawns, a5, and now b5, and queen takes d4. And I'm wondering if Wesley messed up his preparation or forgot the lines here, because it seems like white is doing great after bishop to c4. Wesley took on d4 with the queen, but bishop c4 looks very promising. This pinning action here is very difficult for black. If you take on c3, you have to protect here. I can take on c6, and then play knight d5. I'm threatening to take this. I'm also threatening this, so really difficult position for black. Computer says it's much better for white. But after queen takes d4, Magnus got a chance, and he found a great move here. If you play knight e6, I will play knight c3, and I will transpose to the line I just showed you, which is better for white. But bishop e6 is a great move. Note that you can't play the king either here or here, because bishop to b2, and the knight is pinned. So bishop e6, a nice move, and all of a sudden, white is in some difficulties. He can't take this pawn because bishop e5, and I'm taking your rook. There could be something stronger. I could go for the first rank first, but after knight takes c5, Wesley played rook e2, and he is in a difficult situation here. Rook f to e8. He tried to develop, but cb, and again you don't have time to take. You don't have time to take here first because of the back rank at the end. So bishop e3, trying to, well, cover the back rank. But now bishop to e5. We have a trade, and at the end of all of this, this bishop is fantastically placed to help this 2-1 pawn majority to advance. And that's precisely what happened. Rook b1, the pawn majority advanced. Rook e5, hitting the bishop. We keep on advancing. a3, g3, now rook b5. The threat is simply b3 takes and a2, and we make a queen. White has to give up the rook. So rook c2, still b3. And now we're threatening to block here and then play a2. And we have to be careful not to allow black to be able to play a rook b1 check in some lines and then queen. So therefore, Wesley plays king g2 to get off the first rank. Now Magnus brings the king, bishop d2, keeps the bishop. It's very dangerous. Bishop f4, but now he takes. He's fine with this because he made a weakness now on the king side. And where does the rook belong? Behind the passed pawn. So rook b7 to cover any checks on the 7th, and then the rook behind the passed pawn. And this rook is paralyzed. If it moves, we push the pawn. So white can only move the king, and Magnus just created a zugzwang. King g6, h5, king here. We can take here, but then I guess we take the pawn. So first he protects it, and then king back. King goes away, and now h4. So creating a zugzwang here, has to move the king, and now we bring the king in. And actually nothing white can do. Now the king comes over on the other side. Get this pawn, another passed pawn. And Wesley resigned, so Magnus won. But going back to this position, if Wesley had remembered his lines, bishop c4, then it maybe would have been a different story. So maybe those that have the course can tell me if his analysis go this deep. But on to game number 3, where Magnus took an interesting decision. He had the white pieces, and he basically decided to draw the game. They played a Berlin, and this line has been seen many times. Bishop comes back to f1. We have a trade. White plays d4. Black plays bishop f6. Then he offers a trade, reroutes the knight, knight to e8, so that he can play d5. And this is a very symmetrical pawn structure. g6, preparing to play bishop f5, trade the bishop. Eventually, here we have that. So not a lot of pieces on the board. It's very drawish. And in fact, after knight takes e5, queen d6, knight back, rook e8, queen d2, we actually had these moves, king f7, and then a repetition, queen h6, attacking the pawn, defending the pawn, coming back, hitting the knight, protecting the knight, and then again and again and again. Threefold repetition and a draw. And this happened really fast, so Magnus basically decided to draw with white and tell Wesley, okay, you can have the white pieces in the last game. If you win, you manage to draw game day 1. If you don't, day 1 is mine. So let's see what happened in the last game. Again, Wesley with white, and again e4. And does Magnus go for knight f6 this time? No, he goes for bishop c5. c3 now by Wesley, and d4. And I think he has these lines in his course, in the Chessable course. Bishop to b5, knight e4, cd, bishop back to b6, knight c3. I think this is all relatively well-known theory here. We have castles, bishop e3, bishop g4 the main move, h3 the main move, bishop h5, and queen c2 here, which finally goes slightly off the beaten path, but still a known move. Bishop comes to g6, and only then queen b3. I haven't really studied the subtleties of this move. You know why we play queen c2 first and then queen b3. But I'm sure it's something clever. Knight e7, castle, c6, pushing the bishop, which goes back to d3. And here Magnus starts to initiate some trades. Knight to f5, queen comes back, and now we have a trade on c3. There was previously a game between Aronian and Adams took on e3, which looks very solid as well, something like this. And that game ended in a draw. But Magnus took on c3. After b takes, now he takes on e3. We have more trades. And white has a very nice center, it must be said. And the center is all on the dark squares, so playing a bit against this bishop. So Magnus tries to open it up here, f6. But now c4. Trying to create some weaknesses in the center and get the mass rolling. Try to open up ways for the central pawn mass to start moving. And after this, white has a choice. Black has a choice. If you take with a pawn, you have kind of two weak pawns on b7 and d5, and maybe queen b3 is already annoying. So Magnus prefers to take with a queen. But this means that after takes, and whichever way you take on f6, I can push e4. And now I have this nice mobile center. And what's more, after queen back to d7, well, first we fortify the pawns, and then knight h4, and this beautiful square for the knight. So it looks like white is emerging with a little something something, so slightly better. Knight f5, c5, and now d5. And now we see that this knight will be strong here for a long time. Bishop e5, rook into b1, b6, queen c4. White is setting up kind of a blockade on the light squares, and eventually wants to either try a minority attack on the queen side or go for something on the king side. Also, we can imagine in some cases that the d pawn could be pushed. So many ways for white to play, many trumps. He goes for king h1, prophylactic move, rook f4, now that the opportunity is given to swing the rook. And here Magnus decides he does not want to suffer for a long time and goes for rook takes e4. Sacrificing the exchange, getting a pawn. But the position is difficult. He had to play bishop e5 and, well, he's struggling, he's down the exchange. But he blundered immediately here with rook takes d5. And this allows the super strong move, rook into g4. Now the threat is simple, it's rook to e8 mate. Magnus played h5. Seems to me if you try to cover the mate with rook to d8, I think queen f7 more or less is ending the game here, unless I'm missing something. If rook d7, queen f8 mate, if queen d7, many moves, but the rook forced divorce is one of them. So h5 was played, but rook e8, nice maneuver, rook e7, king back, and only now with a rook on the 7th we play queen c1, eyeing this square, and black can't do anything about it, and Magnus was signed. So day 1, 2-2, draw, 2 points each. So that means that, well, day 2 will be decisive, and at the moment it looks like Wesley So might be in better form. He won against Magnus in the preliminaries and the first game of the tournament, and well, he had better chances in day 1. Knight c5 in the first game. Good opening preparation in his white games. So it looks like Magnus is under some pressure. What will he do on day 2? I suspect he might go for a Sicilian, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. So hope you enjoyed this little review and see you later. Bye bye.